Okay, so week 8. So assessments due this Sunday. So question, are you submitting a process document? No process document needed. As I mentioned, it's the it's the weekly challenges that you guys it's replacing the process. So no need for the process document. Just make sure you're engaging in all of the weekly challenges and you should be fine. Okay. So any other questions, feel free to ask. But again, assessments due on a Friday. It's going to be a relatively quick class, primarily because we've covered everything we need to be able to, do the or complete the assessment properly. So I think you guys are in a good spot. In fact, let's just have a look at what you guys have at this stage, right? So as I mentioned, see, so really good spot there. So with Adam as well. So see, notice now that again looks like an indoor scene, but that's fine. That's something you can adjust, I guess, a little bit. We're going with a more, you know, we're going with a bit more. Bright scene consistent with kids content, right? So just take note of that. So again, good job from a lot of you. If you've done all the challenges from week 5 to 7, I think you're like 90% there, right? 95 at this stage. You really just want to refine it and start rendering. Okay, so with regards to what you're supposed to do, and we already talked about all of that stuff, right? What you're supposed to do, what you're submitting, okay, is you're submitting 5 seconds of. So let me just change that. So again, 5 seconds video, okay? Or worst case scenario, right? You can submit 2 close-ups or maybe around 6 stills. So you won't get as much marks as if you're able to create a video because again, stills, you can't really see things like noise in the stills. But in a video, you can really see all of the noise. So it's about noise management as well. So again, worst case scenario, if your computer can't handle it, you can provide just 6 stills from various angles. So that's going to be 2 wide, 2 mid shots, and 2 close-ups. So basically what will happen is something like this, right? So if you have your camera angle or movement, so maybe one close-up is like that, or maybe like that, another close-up like that, and then maybe that's a mid shot, and then there's a wide one. Okay, so 2 wide ones, and then 2 close-ups. So maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's what you're aiming for, right? So hopefully that's clear in terms of what you're supposed to do. Again, the ideal scenario is you're able to render out the entire sequence, which is from frame 1 to frame 120. Okay, so just checking if that's clear in terms of what you guys are actually submitting. Okay, so again, reminder, right? Either 5 seconds or again, your stills. Again, the reason why stills won't be enough, I mean, obviously, if you render out a sequence, that's better. But I understand that some of you don't have access to fast machines. But still, right? The benefit or the advantage if you're just submitting stills is we can't really see things like noise. And noise is really important, right? How to manage noise is important in any render. So I still prefer, or you see, you're still able to showcase your work better if you do your 5 second sequence. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so just to give you guys an idea, so how do you render out your 5 second sequence? Similar to what you've done in the first assessment, right? And basically what that means is, yes, so again, we'll have a look. Okay, so basically what this means is if you're rendering, let's say GPU or CPU, that means you probably want to limit this to 2 anti-alias points or anti-alias samples. So for the camera, you want to make sure perhaps under your advanced tab, under your, that's under your, that's ray depth. Maybe you have one, basically with diffuse 2, that means you have 2 bounces of lights. So if it's 0, what you're getting is just 1 bounce of lights, right? And then what I'll do is, again, you can have, you can have two bounces of lights if you have the diffuse there. With specular, you probably want that at two, one or two. So you have multiple bounces of lights. So basically, light hits an object and then bounce and hits another object. And you want that bouncing of lights, right? In an ideal scenario, you want a lot of bouncing of lights, like say 3 and 2. But it really depends on your computer. Maybe just limit it to 1 to 2 and maybe here. Okay, so transmission, you definitely need that to be a lot. So basically, you need a lot of bouncing of lights for transmissive objects to be clearer. Okay. Um, for I guess question with regards to Arnold, the thing with GPU for Arnold is it's not really meant for GPU. It's really meant for CPU. So CPU might be better, but if you have a good GPU, then the GPU might work. Uh, Sometimes you get errors with the GPU, but for me, totally fine having it at GPU. Uh, but again, there might be some limitations. So it really depends on what your computer can handle. If you don't have access to a really fast graphics card, then probably just stick with CPU. And I think an overnight render should be fine as long as you keep your, as I mentioned, right? As long as you keep your number of samples limited, and then maybe just add your noise. Okay, so if you add your noise management in the render, I think you should be fine. Okay, so question with regards to Houdini. um, you can't really go wrong with Arnold. Has been around for such a long time, so it's much more stabler than something like Houdini, the GPU render in Houdini. uh, but again, it's still evolving. So there's like four or five really important renders out there. So there's RenderMan, there's Arnold, there's V-Ray, there's GPU renders as well, like Redshift. But again, you can't really go wrong with any of them. Okay, so um, sometimes the rendering. The thing with Houdini is we didn't really do any of this interior exterior stuff. So and we didn't really do any advanced shading. So this might be easier. For example, you might find it hard doing some of the shading stuff inside Houdini. Okay. So either way, that's what you need to do, right? You need to perhaps, if you're rendering CPU, just keep it at 2. If you're rendering GPU, just keep it at 10 or 20. You can even go 50 depending on your GPU. Okay, but something like that should be fine. Okay, so how do you actually render out stuff? Number one, guys, okay, under the common tab, right? Make sure that you're rendering JPEGs. Okay, so again, I prefer that you render JPEGs. We'll cover EXR later on. The reason is it will automatically transform your image correctly. So you're going to be using JPEGs, and that means your color management will be sRGB automatically, which makes things easier. If you're rendering something like OpenXR, then you have to do the proper color management conversion. Because if you're converting that into a video, it's hard. Primarily because if you're using OpenXR, it has a different color profile or color space when you try to convert that into a video inside something like Adobe Media Encoder. So to make things easier, I just want you guys to perhaps just use JPEG for that. And then I think using the view transform is fine. Specify your start and end frame. So for example, me, I'm ending at frame 120. Okay, give it a name, specify where you're saving it. So if you set your projects correctly, like this, notice that it will automatically save it in the images subdirectory. Now, for your name, you can just add it in. But what I like doing, right, is I like giving it a folder. So I'll just call that my render, for example. So here, I'll just call this my render. Okay, and then add so my render. Okay, and then add a stroke. And then maybe I'll call it my render again. Okay, and the reason for that is, see, so notice now I have a stroke, and then now I basically have a subdirectory called my render, and I have my images from my render 001 all the way to my render 020. So you basically get an image sequence. Okay, so what happens next is you just again specify that you're rendering again JPEGs. Frame padding of 4. So again, 3 or 4 is fine, but the idea is, see, you start If 3, it's 3 digits, 001. But it's 4, it's now 4 digits, 0001. Okay, so maybe I'll just keep it at 3. And then that's it. You specify the camera. Okay, specify the resolution. Let's just go HD 720, so it's not too big. And then that's it, everyone. Okay, so once you specify that, let's say this one I'm rendering GPU. Once you're done, all you need to do is just go to the rendering tab, similar to what you did in the first assessment. Go render, and then just go do a render sequence. Don't do a batch render. Do a render sequence. Just click on this button. Just make sure you're enabling all layers. And then if I just click on render sequence, see, I'll probably end up stopping it, but see, I'll just click on render sequence. It will open the render view window, and it will just render one image at a time, right? And then again, it's eating up my memory, so I might need to stop it. But I'm just showing you that that's what you end up doing, right? Rendering a sequence. Let me just quickly check. So I guess just to prove my point, if you don't believe me, right? As I mentioned, it's going to create a subdirectory in your project folder. And I guess just to prove my point, okay, so that's my stylized scene. In my images subdirectory, remember, I called it my render. Okay. Let's see if I have a temp here. So anyway, that's my render. And see, your JPEG files will be there. So I already have a few EXR files. Maybe I'll just keep that for now. So I'll just remove this so you won't get confused. So see, it opens this up. Okay. So see that one? That's my first render. Okay. I don't have any, I didn't really use any depth of field. But again, this is where, you maybe put in depth of field and then maybe, animate the camera and all of that stuff, right? So hopefully that's clear. Okay. In terms of what you actually ended up doing. Okay. So I'm going to stop it, right? Maybe I'll just render the second one so you guys can see. So again, remember, right? What we did was we specified, and let me just render that last image and then I'll cancel it afterwards. So let's just have that render. There you go. Okay, so I'll cancel it. There you go. So as I mentioned, right? See, it's called my render. So it's going to save it in the images subdirectory. There's my render, and notice now that, see, that's exactly what happened. That's my project folder there under the images subdirectory. It's called my render, and I have that my render underscore 001. So that's my first image, and that's my second image there. Okay. So what happens is you create an image sequence, right? So it's going to be 120 frames. So mine is relatively quick. It probably took just 2 minutes to render one. So again, a lot will depend on what system you have. Okay. So with that said, how do you actually end up converting that into a video? So let's see if I have a sample video here. So let me see if I have something that already has an image sequence. So it looks like I don't, but it's no big deal. I'll just look for something. So I'll just look for something that already has a sequence. Maybe this one. Oh, that's EXR. Let's see. That's EXR. So let me just look for something that already has a sequence, guys. You know what? I think I have one here. Sorry. So basically, to convert an image sequence into a movie file, remember you're using something like, I don't know, Adobe Media Encoder or Adobe Premiere. And the idea behind that, it converts an image sequence into a video, right? So again, I'm just demonstrating it again. We covered that a few times already, but just to show you. So see, it's this one, right? This is Media Encoder. You'll have access to that as a student. And then at the same time, I'm going to just look for an image sequence there. And maybe for this, see, I have an image sequence. Maybe I'll just use So just an example, maybe that one. Okay. And maybe see that first image, I'll import that. Okay. And again, see, it's H.264. That's the correct format to use. Everything else at the default. One quick thing though is I like going to my preferences and I like making sure that under media, I'm importing 24 frames per second because I am animating at 24 because the default is 30. So I need to just change it to 24. But again, that's under file or under edit preferences, right? So again, under file or sorry, edit preferences, right? And then under media, so you can just change that. So with that said, see, so now I have this. I just specify where I'm saving it. Let me just save that in my desktop, for example. So let me just save that in my desktop and I give it a name. So that one, and then see, I'll just render that one out. Okay. And there you go, right? So once you render that one out, see, now you have, I guess, something like that. See, so I just rendered it out and that's my sequence already. Okay, so hopefully that's clear in terms of what you guys are actually doing. Okay, so just quickly checking if it's clear in terms of what the first preference, right? So ideally, you actually render out a 5-second video on top of engaging in the weekly challenges. But is that clear for everyone here? So just checking with Adam, Ida, Justina, Danny, Jacob, Jared, and Julian. So relatively straightforward. Okay, and then this option is relatively straightforward. So basically, if you want that option of just rendering out stills, remember, you can just use your Arnold render view. Okay, and then render out an image. Let's say this is my wide shot. So I'll just render it out. Okay, and see, I'm rendering it out like so. Obviously, I didn't spend too much time here, but that's where you come in. And then once you're done, all you need to do is go File and then Save Image, and then just save that as a JPEG image, and then save that somewhere, for example, let's say in the desktop. And I'll just call that image 1. So wide shot. Okay. And then there you go. Save it. And it's a JPEG file. And then just to prove my point, it's here. So see, this is my wide shot. See, this one is my wide shot. See, so now I have that rendered out. Okay. So hopefully that's clear in terms of how you're submitting your stuff. So that means you just end up creating 6 of those images. You can put them, you can zip them, or you can archive them together and send the images, or you can just send them all, right? All 6 images. But again, the ideal scenario is to actually render out that 5-second video. Okay, so with that said, okay, hopefully it's clear. Again, we're doing stylized stuff, right? So this is where you will come in and then explore how you can achieve, the stylized look that you're aiming for. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys at this stage. And maybe I'll just cover some tips. But this is where, this is where I want to really encourage you to just explore, experiment, because there's really no way around it. It's useless for me to show you a particular technique because that's specific to the technique I'm using. If you actually, for example, if you want it looking like a painterly look, like oil painting, right? You really have to experiment because it can be thousands of different looks, right? And we don't have enough time to cover every single look, how you can achieve it. It's really, I prefer that you guys just spend time experimenting, seeing how to capture a certain look that you plan for. And then if you're able to do it, great. If not, then at least you're able to experiment, right? So that's the important thing. So hopefully, again, that's clear. Again, in terms of what we're aiming for. So we're looking for that gradient look. And then we look for that painterly textures and even contour lines. And maybe I'll just cover how, an example of how you can achieve those contour lines, right? Again, we just need that area to be fully shaded. The rest can have that gray texture, similar to what I have there in my image. So see? And then that's the area. This one, you don't really need that. We're just talking about that, but that's the air, I just added that in just to make things interesting. So again, hopefully that's clear, right? And we've been doing that already. Okay, so with that said, right, this is our process. You guys are already at the stage where you're just refining your stuff and hopefully rendering out stuff. So that's good. For some of you who haven't been sharing, just make sure to do it so we can see your progress, okay, as we move along. So at this stage, what I really just want to cover is just a few things that can help you just enhance your stuff. So maybe a background, okay? So notice that I do have a background there. Okay, and the background is not an HDR, similar to what you guys have, right? So if you actually want to use your own background, I'll just quickly show you. Okay, so if you want to use your own background, okay, so this is something without the background. See, notice that it's using that HDR, and that's probably not what I want. Okay, in fact, the HDR is really there just for lighting. It's not really meant for lighting. In fact, what I normally do with the HDR here is I normally just have that invisible in the camera. So I'll zero that one out. So see, basically you get nothing there. Okay, so if you actually want to have your own background, okay, the best way to go about it, there's really a lot of options, but I'll just show you one option, and that is to just create a background plane. So let's say that can be a plane, a polygon plane. I'll just call that background. Okay, there you go. And then I'll just reposition that and maybe rotate it. Okay, and basically that's going to be my background. I'll place it where you don't have to place it everywhere, right? So that's not the point. The point is you place it where you actually see it. So maybe here. See, I can see it from the back from there. So see. So what I'll do, okay, there you go. So what I'll do, guys, is I'm going to just assign a special material to it. Because we need a special material to this. We need a material that is not affected by lights. Meaning we just get the background without actually having it affected by lights or not having it contribute to the lighting of your scene. Okay? So you just want it as a flat background. So the correct material to use for this is under Windows. Let's just go Hypershade. And let me just clear my Hypershade window. Okay, so the correct material to use for something like a background is what we call the AI flat surface. So you go Arnold, and there's something there called AI flat, I think. So there you go. See, AI flat. Flat means it's not affected by lights, so it doesn't have anything like shading or shadows. So it's basically just a flat image. Okay, so it doesn't have specularity, it doesn't have any of that stuff, just a flat image. So I'll just use flat, and I'll just call that map BG or Mac background. Okay, see, notice what happens. It doesn't really have any diffuse, any transmission, all of that stuff. It's just a plain color. Okay, so this is where you plug in your background. And I think I already have a background here. So let me just have a quick look. So I think I have a background. So let's just have a quick look. There you go. Okay, so there's a background there. So this one, I think. So see? So I just downloaded something, right? So maybe I'll use that. Okay, so what I'll do, guys, is I'll just look for that image. Okay, and then I'll look for, let's say, file texture. So that's a file. And then look for that image. So that's under background. So there you go. It's this one, right? And then hit open. Okay, as I mentioned, see? Notice what happens. If I just turn on hardware texturing, I haven't assigned it yet, sorry. So I'll assign that matte background to that object by just selecting that object. So see, right click, assign material to the selection, right? So see, this one has that matte background. It's a flat one. And then what I'll do is I'll just reposition that properly in my camera. So that's a bit too big. So maybe I'll just make that smaller, too small. So maybe I'll make that smaller. And I really just want maybe the house there, rotating that a little bit. There you go. Okay, so maybe that one. Okay, so if I have a quick look, render that one out. Notice what happens, guys. So let's just render that one out. Okay, so for whatever reason, it's not rendering. I'll just render it here, and hopefully that's actually... There you go. Okay, so let me just save this just in case. Again, I just have a, it's probably because I rendered out stuff. So let's see. Let me close this. So let's just open that again very quickly. So still doesn't work. It looks like I might need to reset. But again, it should be there, right? So the background should be there. Again, I just have too many stuff happening at the same time. So let me just open that again. So I guess question, painterly look. It will take some time for that painterly look. Uh, I guess just see how it goes. And maybe if you're exporting 4K textures, that's going to really cause a lot of, delays. So just limit it to 2K textures or maybe 1K textures when you're exporting from Substance Painter. Okay, so just see how that goes first. Okay, at the same time, it might be your settings as well. So make sure to just optimize. Don't have too many, um, too much sampling there, and it might be fine. Just see how that goes first. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll set that project again and then open that scene again. Okay, so just to show you guys, if I just hit play, so hopefully that renders out. So I did save that, right? So see, notice that the background works. See? So now I have a good background there, right? So again, the AI flat surface is really good for that type of stuff. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. So AI flat surface for your background, really useful. Subdivisions, I talked about this already in the first assessment. There's going to be a lot of stuff here that are very jagged. And just to prove my point, so see, for example, this one, remember when we have this shot? Maybe it's not that obvious here, but maybe if I just do a zoom out. So see guys, that one, right? So see, that one is really jagged, but you guys remember, right? You can easily just select that object, okay? If it's a bit too jagged or low res, you can add the subdivisions in render time, meaning select that object, for example, like that. Go to, let's say, the shape of that object. Go to Arnold, and under Arnold, just introduce a subdivision. I Catmull-Clark one, and then maybe 2 subdivisions. Okay, so notice what happens. See, that is much smoother than what I had earlier. Okay, so see this one, right? The hat, notice it's smooth, but notice now if you actually have a look, see the original one looks like this, so very jagged. Okay, but if you actually, or if you removed it, I think, okay, looks very jagged there. But if you actually add a Catmull-Clark subdivision and maybe 2 subdivisions there, see, notice now that it's very smooth. Similar to, let's say, that area there, that pink area, similar stuff, right? Catmull-Clark, 2 subdivisions, see, it softens that up quite a bit. Okay, so see, notice now that that looks good. And just to prove my point, even for, let's say, this hat, so see, even for that hat, see, notice now that hat, I can select that, change that to Catmull-Clark, 2 subdivisions, and now notice now it's smooth. Okay, and you can do it almost for anything really, right? For example, see the ribbon around the hat. I can select that. See, and then do another cut and Clark subdivision. And now it's totally smooth. Okay. So hopefully that's clear in terms of how you want to approach that. Okay. And I think we're almost done. Okay. So maybe one last thing, the toon shader. Okay. So if you're playing around with a toon shader, okay. Uh, Also, I prefer that if you're experimenting stuff, there are tutorials out there with regards to Arnold, um, that shows painterly textures where you're combining a lot of different nodes. It's okay. It will take some time to render those type of stuff. It uses the AI toon. So my preference is probably just try to do it inside Substance Painter, do it as a texture rather than try doing it as a shader. Because if you do it as a shading network, that really eats up a lot of time. No way around it. If you're, for example, looking at tutorials where they're creating this painterly oil painting type of stuff within Arnold with a lot of shading networks and a lot of interconnections, that's going to require a lot of rendering. It's just how it is. Okay, so I would prefer, if you are looking at tutorials, maybe just look for painterly textures inside Substance Painter. So for example, painterly textures, Substance Painter. Maybe that's my preference. And the reason for that is that will export an image file or basic a texture. And that's going to be significantly faster than trying to create a network inside Arnold, right? So just some tips, okay? I think that's it. So, okay, one last thing. Maybe haven't really specified how you can do the the contour lines because there's really a lot of ways to do it. I'll just maybe cover one. So with contour lines, right? What you're able to experiment with contour lines is maybe you can use, I'll just show you guys, okay? And what I'll do is maybe just hide. So maybe here. Okay, there you go. And what I'll do is I'll just hide other things. Okay, so maybe I'll hide the world, maybe hide the clothes and accessories. Okay, and maybe the accessories as well. And maybe this one. Okay. Yeah, the thing with yeah, and unfortunately, when you're dealing with Substance Painter, even when you're dealing with sculpting, you're really limited to what your system is allowed. It will let you do. So I guess the best way to perhaps deal with it is if it's eating too much resources, then just come up with something simpler, rather than trying to, I guess, rather than doing an approach that eats up too much resources, try doing a simpler approach. If the simple approach still doesn't work, then we have an issue with the system itself, right? So that means we need an access to a faster machine, or we might need more graphics, either a better graphics card or even more memory. So for example, I don't really have a lot of memory. It's good enough, but my memory is 128 gigabytes for in this machine. The machine is not very old, but with 3D and with graphics in general, you really need a lot of memory. So that's RAM. So I have 128. 64 should be okay, but really depends really. So 64, if you're doing 2K resolution at 64, it's fine. 2K or 1K. Really depends if you're doing like lots and lots of layers as well in sorry, lots and lots of layers inside Substance Painter. That's another thing. Okay. Yeah, 32 really depends. I need to do a lot of things. So 128 for me is a starting point, but you have systems that go 256. So maybe it's just the number of layers. What you can do is you can share, if it's a substance thing, you can share your substance painter file, or it might be a graphics card thing where you just need to download the latest version of your graphics card. Because with Substance Painter, it does require the latest version of your graphics card to make sure that it's efficient. So with that said though, let me just have a quick look. Okay, so this is currently my shader, guys. Okay, if I render it out, and I'll just remove that lens effect. Okay, so basically I have something like that, right? Okay, so remember, and maybe I'll just rotate this so you can see it in the background. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so I have something like this. Okay, now if you have a look, we do want, if you can find a way to create some sort of contour lines, right? Similar to this one. There's a lot of methods for that, but maybe the easiest method for that is to just change your shader. And let me just show you what I mean. So the shader I'm using for this, I'll select that. I'm going to graph that material. I'm going to hypershade and graph that material. So basically, this is my material for the body, right? So if you have a look, see, complicated, but this is my material. Those are the textures assigned to it. So I have a metallic texture. I don't even need this emission, really. So I'll just remove that so you won't get confused. Maybe I'll lower that down. So see, basically, I have that, right? So I have my base color here. So maybe I'll just move that there. So see, and I have metalness, I have roughness, I have normal map, and I even have displacements. So you don't really need displacements. But anyway, see, so I have the body texture there. So there you go. Okay. So if you want something a bit more stylized, you can change the material. Okay. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Okay. I'll create a new material, guys. But before that, you know what? Let me just create a material. So there's a special material for stylized 2D stuff. I don't really use it that much, but there's a material in Arnold called the AI Toon shader. So it's toon, but it's not really toon. It's just a stylized material you could use. So if you click on it, basically that's the material, right? I'll give it a name. Maybe matte stylized, for example. Okay. Now notice that it has some additional controls, but it's still basically the same. It has a base color, specular. It has it has stylized highlights, etc., which is not common. But you do have sheen, you do have emission, and under geometry, you still have bump mapping there. So it's basically a standard, not really a standard, but it's basically an Arnold material, right? With just additional levels of control there. The only issue you have with this material, guys, is this really works if you change your renderer. If you change your renderer, that's why we didn't cover this, because you have to change your renderer. So you have to use CPU for this particular material. So that AI Toon material, you have to use CPU. It doesn't work with GPU, unfortunately. And I'll just bring this back to, let's say, 2. Okay. And then another weird thing is you have to change the under filter. You have to change the filter from Gaussian to contour filter. So basically it allows you to calculate contours. So those are the edges of your object. So I'll just click on contour there. Okay. So notice what happens, right? I'm going to assign that to my object. Okay. So remember, that's my body. I'm going to assign that to this matte stylized material that I created. So the matte stylized material is this one, right? I'll just right click on it, assign material to selection. So see, guys, notice what happens. You automatically get that edge contour line. Okay. So see, that material there, see, notice now that it automatically gives you that edge contour line. Okay. You can play around with it. And the reason why it automatically gives you that, and just to prove my point, if you didn't have contour there, if you just use the Gaussian, right? Notice that you don't get the contour lines. So that's why you have to have contour, right? Under the filter. On top of that, if you go system and change that to GPU, notice what happens as well. You won't get the contours again. And the reason for that, even you actually get an error, right? It doesn't really work. So see, it actually stopped rendering. Because it doesn't work with the GPU, you really have to use the CPU for that. And then at the same time, have contours there. But I do get that nice contour lines. Now, the thing with the contour lines is notice that it actually has under edge detection, okay? And under edge, notice that you can actually change the color to make that gray. So see, now it's a little bit gray. So there you go. See, it's a little bit gray. And then you can even change the scaling of that. So see, so that's the AI tunes. Make that smaller. Okay. So now I see a little bit of that contour line. Maybe I'll make that bigger. Okay. On top of that, I think you also have silhouette to give it a silhouette look. So see, on top of the silhouette look, maybe I'll just lower down the width. Okay. And now I have that, you know, with that contour thing going, right? Maybe I can even make that bigger. So there you go. Okay, I can make this bigger. Okay, there you go. Okay, so now I have that contour line. Now, question is, okay, you got all of that. Yes, so can you make that actually blend with the original material? Yes, so you just go to the hypershade. So rendering and then hypershade. Okay. Not sure where my hypershade is, so there you go. So my hypershade, right? So remember, this is my original shader, right? But remember, this material, if you see, this stylized material, it actually has things like base color, right? So there's color there. So all you need to do is just look for that color, this one, right? That's the color for our material. So again, I select this matte stylized. See, I'll middle mouse button drag this texture. That's why I need both of them visible. So I middle mouse drag that texture. So see it, this one, middle mouse drag directly to the color of that stylized one. So see, now it's connected. Okay. Remember, another thing is the specular. So specular, I look for specular, that's specular roughness. So I'll just middle mouse button drag, specular roughness here, and maybe give it a little bit of specularity. Okay, and maybe increase that one. And normal map. Normal map is under bump mapping. So similar stuff. So see this normal map or whatever normal map you have. Just middle mouse button drag that to the normal. So I think it's this bump mapping. You know what? Not quite sure. I can just redo it again, meaning I can go back in here, break connections, click on that. I'll go to File, and under File, I'll just change it to Tangent Space Normals. Then I'll just look for that particular one. I think that's under Girl Textures, Painter Body Normal. Okay, and then remember that's Dada, so change that to Raw. So see guys, notice what happens. I have that, obviously a bit too much. So that's probably from my specular. So what I'll do is from my specular here, I'll lower down specular. Maybe it's a bit too much. Maybe I'll increase the roughness. Sorry, break the connection. I actually want the roughness here, right? So let me just see. So that's roughness. Plug in the roughness here. Okay. And let's see what that looks like. So see, notice now that I have something like that. Okay, and now it has its contour lines. Okay, and at this stage, you can experiment with that, play around with it. You have other things as well, like sheen, rim lighting, transmission. But you have, you know, scaling, let's say 2. And then scaling here like 2. See, so there you go. Okay, so you now have all of that stuff. Okay, so maybe I'll just bring everything up. Contour lines, yes you can. So see here, right under the silhouette, note a silhouette and also the edge detection. So see, so you can change the color to, let's say, yellow. I think it's under silhouette here, so yellow. So notice now that, there you go. So you are able to change the color. So the silhouette itself has a color and the edge itself has a color. So I can turn off silhouette and see, I can just change the color to yellow. Okay, so now I have something like that. You can even change the scaling, meaning, let me see, if I change the scaling to, let's say, I'll look for a noise one. So just to give it a noise, and I'll just use an Arnold one, maybe AI cellular noise. Um, out color. So maybe out color, connect that to the, not quite sure. Was it edge width scale? There you go. And let's see if that actually works. And maybe I'll change the, you don't have to, but I'll just change the scaling. It doesn't really work that well. So I think it might be amplitude, but let's see. Okay. So I just want to break up the lines a little bit. So I'm thinking it might be opacity. I'll check. Okay. So maybe I'll here in opacity, I'll just add a AI cellular noise. And maybe it's the out transparency to the edge opacity. There you go. So see, so that works. So it's actually opacity, guys. So basically what I'm doing is not the scaling. Maybe I'll just have that the same scale, but it's the opacity. I just added a noise there, and maybe I'll just change it to, let's say, 10, 10, and 10. And maybe I'll change that to a cellular noise. So see, it just breaks it up a little bit. So notice now that it does break it up a little bit. Maybe I'll just change that to, so see, so you don't have to, but it does break it up a little bit. And then maybe I can lower down the opacity, the scaling, and maybe change that to, let's say, black or gray. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so again, I'll do it one more time, right? So basically the idea is, okay, so for example, if you have things like clothes, right? And again, I'll just graph the material on, I'll clear the graph first, graph the material on, so I'll select the clothes, I'll graph the material, okay, on the selected object. So I'll just need to select one of them, right? So graph, materials on selected objects. So see, that's the material for the clothes. I'll introduce a new shader, right? Remember, we use an AI toon shader, plug it in there. I'll give it a name. Okay, so this AI toon shader, I'll call that matte clothes. Okay, and then from that matte clothes, what I can do is, again, I'll assign that to my clothes, which is this one. So see, I'll look for that matte clothes, which is this. And then let's see what that looks like if I render that one out. So I have that contour lines there. So the contour lines are working. And again, it doesn't work unless you actually change your system to CPU. And then on top of that, change your filter to contour. And then just have like 2 anti-alias points. But we're still not done because, as I mentioned, right, with that matte clothes, it does require my roughness. So for my roughness map, I'll just plug that into the roughness here. So middle mouse button drag. And then for my color, which is this, I'll drag that into my base color, which is that. And then I think I have normal map as well. So where's my normal map? I think it's this one. See, that's my bump value. So I'll plug that bump 2D node directly to my bump mapping. Okay. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, so see guys, notice now that it does have those contour lines and stuff like that. Okay. And I think that's it. Okay, so if I just see what it looks like. So see, now I have my contour lines and I can modify the contour lines on top of that. Okay, so if you don't believe me, see, I can select that contour lines, go to, let's say, the material, and then see, change the scaling to, let's say, 0.3, and I even change the color to something lighter. And now I have, I guess, something like that. So there you go. Okay, so notice now that I do have that contour line there. Okay, so I think that's it. So let's see what this looks like at the end. Let me just change my, let me just view everything. I remove this background. So it is rendering. Hopefully it renders. Okay, there you go. So that's what I'm getting. So remember, I am rendering it. Remember your denoiser, guys. So in your Arnold render settings, right? Remember the better denoiser to use. So remember this one, right? So this is your Arnold renderer. But remember, if you click on the cog, there are imagers you can use. Maybe just use the denoiser optics one, which is pretty good, I think. Okay, that looks okay. And then maybe I'll add a lens effect. And maybe my lens effect involves a little bit of vignetting. So maybe 0.3 and maybe a little bit of blooming. Let's say 0.05, for example. Okay, so notice now that everything looks okay. It's still rendering. And then on top of that, maybe I'll just activate my common tab. Remember, environment. So I plug that in. And let's see what it looks like. And then I'll update my render. So let's see what that looks like. And then on top of that, right, you can add depth of field. So let's just play around with this first. So it is eating up some rendering. Hopefully it didn't crash. So it might have crashed, but anyway, the idea is you do have depth of field. I can add depth of field. So just check the first week 5 or even previous weeks where I covered how to add depth of field. And then at the same time, there's, there's fog lights or environment fog. And then on top of that, I have some stylized stuff there. So I think I'm ready to go. So let me just close this. So I think that's it, guys. Okay, but rather than having to restart, I'm just showing you that we did cover, a few things there already with regards to, how you can enhance stuff. We talked about how you're rendering your stuff and then also a few final things to help you with your render. Okay, and I'll just leave it at there, at that. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just one last challenge, and it's basically just showing your final work in Teams. Okay, and again, quick way to just earn some points. So what I'll do is I'll just plug that in here, start the post, make that an announcement, and then maybe 300, and then week 8 challenge. And again, assessments due on a Sunday. Right now, if you have any issues or concerns, we still have a couple more days. So make sure to just have a look at that, find ways to optimize it, and then see how that goes moving forwards, right? So I think that's it. Okay. So as I mentioned, crash, don't really want to restart. But any other questions? Is that clear for everyone at this stage? So final check, just making sure that you're good for the assessment. So that's Adam, Ida, Justina, Jared, and Jungyan. Making sure that you're good at this stage. So if there's no questions, okay, looking forward to seeing your work. Vote for your 3 favorite ones. Let's see who comes up with some interesting stuff here. Okay. So again, looking forward to seeing it, guys. Again, I'm here for the next few days. So just make sure to either schedule a consultation or just post stuff in Teams or in our Teams page, and then we can get it sorted. Okay, so I'll stop the recording at this stage. And then I'll see you guys next week. Okay, so enjoy the rest of the day.